Hey everyone, welcome back to the Incredible India podcast series. I'm Sam.
And I'm Kaylee.
So imagine trying to sprint up a steep, icy mountain, right? But you're wearing perfectly smooth-soled dress shoes.
Yeah, you just immediately slide backward.
Exactly. Now imagine trying to do that exact same sprint, but you're a 50-ton steel machine. Today, we're taking a deep dive into an impossible piece of 19th century engineering that somehow actually beat those physics.
It's honestly mind-boggling.
It really is. We're talking about the Nilgiri Mountain Railway, which is widely known as the toy train of India's Blue Mountains. And our roadmap for today's deep dive is a really comprehensive 2026 travel and historical guide provided by 5 census tours.
Right, and our mission for you today is basically twofold. First, we're going to uncover exactly how this Victorian fever dream managed to conquer the steepest railway gradient in all of Asia.
Which is a wild story on its own.
Oh, absolutely. And second, we'll explore why experiencing this incredibly rare, fully operational piece of history is actually the master key to understanding the ecological diversity of South India.
So to even understand why anyone would attempt to push a steel train up a cliff face, you kind of have to look at the massive geographical headache facing the British colonial administration in the mid-19th century.
Yeah, you really have to set the scene.
Right. So we are looking at the Madras presidency. Down on the plains, the heat is just relentless. It's baking, it's oppressive, and it's pretty miserable for the administrators.
Definitely.
So they established their summer capital up in Uti or Udhagamandalam up in the Nilgiri Hills. And that sits at a lovely, cool 2,203 meters above sea level.
Which, I mean, from a climate perspective, brilliant move.
Yeah.
The Nilgiri Hills in summer are lush, beautiful, and most importantly, they are cold.
Right.
But their logistical problem was catastrophic. Because just getting there was an absolute nightmare. The road from the plains up into the hills was this grueling multi-day journey.
Yeah, and you had to travel by bullock cart or like a palanquin.
Exactly.
And the guide paints a pretty grim picture of that road trip. I mean, it wasn't just a slow, bumpy ride. These dense, lower elevation forests were wildly dangerous.
Oh, yeah, malaria. Right.
Malaria-infested jungles, exactly. Plus the constant threat of wild animals and paths that would just literally wash away during monsoon season. It was exhausting and hazardous.
Which brings an administration that desperately needs a fast, reliable connection between their permanent base on the baking plains and their seasonal capital in the hills, basically to a breaking point.
Yeah.
So enter this British engineer named John Sullivan in 1854. He looks at this brutal terrain and proposes a railway.
As you do.
Right. But the engineering challenge is objectively absurd. You're talking about climbing from 326 meters down at Mettupalayam to 2,203 meters in Uti.
And that's over a distance of just 46 kilometers.
Yeah.
That is an elevation gain of nearly 1,900 meters and almost no distance at all.
Which is wild. And that requires a gradient of 8.33% on the absolute steepest sections.
See, I feel like we need to give some context for that number because 8.33% doesn't sound that crazy until you realize how a train actually works.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
Right, because standard freight trains start to severely struggle if a track tilts even 1 or 2%. We are talking about a slope more than 4 times steeper than conventional physics allows a standard steel wheel to handle.
Right, because a conventional adhesion train just pushes its smooth steel drive wheels against smooth steel tracks.
Exactly. Trying to take a normal train up an 8.33% gradient is exactly like that analogy of putting on smooth-soled shoes on an icy hill.
It just doesn't work.
You can pump the engine as hard as you want, but there's zero friction, gravity wins, and you slide helplessly backward.
So the physics of a standard adhesion railway simply hit a wall here. And the administration actually knew this.
But this is the part of the history I honestly cannot wrap my head around. Sullivan proposes this train in 1854, and his superiors reject it. So he proposes it again. Rejected.
Classic bureaucracy.
Right. A third time, a fourth time. This goes on for 45 years. Across multiple committees, countless surveys, and different engineers, the answer is always a flat no.
Because the gradients are impossible and the terrain is too hostile.
Exactly. And honestly, if I'm the British administration and this idea is failing for nearly half a century, I'm taking all that capital, hiring a massive workforce, and just blasting a better, wider, paved road up the mountain. Why violently insist on a train?
Well, what's fascinating here is you could try to build a better road, but that actually wouldn't solve their core problem.
Really? Why not?
You have to remember what road transport meant in the 1850s and 60s. Even on a perfectly graded road, you are entirely reliant on animal power.
Oh, right. No trucks yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A road journey is inherently slow, incredibly vulnerable to extreme weather, and fundamentally incapable of handling heavy freight efficiently. A train represented an industrial-scale movement,
So it wasn't just about moving people.
right? They needed to move supplies, building materials, and communication infrastructure for an entire government. They needed the sheer tonnage and speed that only a railway could provide.
Wow, okay. So they were completely stuck until they finally looked to Switzerland.
Yes. The Swiss have a long history of looking at vertical walls of rock and deciding to build transport up them.
They really do.
So the breakthrough for the Nilgiris came via a Swiss engineer named Roman App. He had pioneered this rack-and-pinion system. The concept is mechanically brilliant.
How does it work?
Well, instead of relying on just two smooth, conventional rails, you lay a third rail right down the center of the track. But this third rail is heavily toothed. It's basically a rack. Then you fit the steam locomotive with a matching heavy-duty pinion gear underneath.
Ah, so the gear on the train physically interlocks with the teeth on the track.
Exactly. It creates an unbreakable mechanical grip. As long as that gear is turning, the train physically cannot slip backward, regardless of the 8.33% gradient.
That's genius. But even with that Swiss technology, the guide notes this was still a massive leap of faith.
Oh, for sure.
Because, I mean, the Abbott system worked in the freezing, snowy Swiss Alps, but they were bringing it to the tropical jungles of South India.
And that changes the engineering entirely. In the Alps, you worry about ice and snow clearance.
Yeah.
In the Nilgiris, you are dealing with torrential monsoon rains, intense tropical humidity, and aggressive jungle overgrowth.
Right, it's a completely different beast.
They had to engineer this rack and pinion system so that massive mudslides wouldn't bury the tracks, rust wouldn't seize the gears, and the sheer weight of the tropical rainfall wouldn't wash the entire foundation down the cliff.
They were adapting Alpine technology for a rainforest.
Yeah, but miraculously it held. In 1899, the very first train made the grueling climb from Mettupalayam to Coonoor.
And because they were forced to rely on that heavy, highly specialized Swiss steam technology, the physical experience of riding this train today is unlike anything else on Earth.
It really is.
The detail that should absolutely stop anyone in their tracks is that the steam locomotives hauling you up that sheer cliff today are not museum replicas.
No, they are the genuine article.
Right. You aren't taking selfies in front of a restored antique that runs on a flat track for tourists. These are the exact same working machines, utilizing the same Swiss design from the 1890s, doing the exact same brutal engineering tasks they were built for over a century ago.
It operates as a literal living time machine.
Yeah.
When you sit in those carriages and feel that distinctive, heavy lurch as the rack and pinion mechanism engages the track, you're feeling the exact same mechanical heartbeat that every passenger has felt since 1899.
That's incredible to think about.
You're on the same tracks, relying on the same gears, passing over the same stone bridges. That unbroken chain of continuous operation is the specific reason UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site in 2005.
Which was an extension of the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway, right?
Exactly. Finding 19th century infrastructure serving its original purpose, utilizing its original mechanical technology against this kind of geography is just incredibly rare.
So let's actually put the listener on that train right now, specifically on that dramatic lower section, the 27 kilometers from Mettupalayam up to Coonoor.
Oh, this part is amazing.
You arrive at the station early because the train rolls out at 7:10 a.m. Down on the plains, it's already warm and humid. There's this thick morning mist hanging over the lower slopes, and the Blue Mountains are just massive, imposing shadows up in the clouds.
The sensory shift over the next few hours of that climb is staggering. By the time you finally pull into Coonoor, the ambient temperature will have plummeted by 15 degrees.
Wow. So you start off rolling relatively smoothly through flat agricultural lands. It's peaceful. And then the gradient hits.
And you feel it.
Oh, you feel it. You hear this heavy, visceral, mechanical clunk from right beneath the wooden carriage as the gear locks into the rack. The sound of the steam locomotive changes instantly.
Right, it goes from a rhythmic chug to this incredibly labored, heavy breathing as it starts fighting gravity.
Exactly. And the angle of your seat literally tilts backward. Within minutes, the flatlands completely disappear into dense, dark forest, which then falls away to reveal these massive, rocky gorges.
And the sheer scale of the manual labor required to cut a path through those gorges is mind-boggling when you see it up close. On this upward journey, you pass through 16 tunnels, cross over 257 bridges, and navigate 209 sharp curves.
All cut by hand.
Yeah, and because you are on the edge of the cliff, you get this dizzying, unobstructed view of the Bhavani River Valley far below. It drops away so steeply that the height you gain in just 10 minutes of travel is genuinely astonishing.
Wait, I'm just putting something together from the guide's timeline here. If they carved those 16 tunnels through solid rock in the 1890s, there was no electrical grid in this region.
None at all.
So when you enter one of those tunnels today, there's no internal lighting installed. Are you just sitting in a wooden carriage in pitch black?
Absolutely, completely dark. The moment the carriage clears the tunnel entrance, your vision is entirely gone.
That is such a wild sensory detail.
It really is.
You're suddenly plunged into total darkness for 10, maybe 20 seconds at a time. And with your vision gone, your hearing must completely take over.
Oh, it amplifies everything.
You're just surrounded by the massive, deafening, echoing sound of that original Swiss steam engine bouncing aggressively off the raw rock walls of the tunnel. And then, boom, you burst back out into the bright mountain daylight, and the landscape outside your window has transformed yet again.
That auditory experience is a huge part of understanding the mechanics. Even when you cross the bridges, and remember, there are 257 of them, the sound of the wheels on the rails completely changes.
How so?
Well, the echoes bounce off the valley walls rather than the forest floor. The mechanical soundtrack of this journey demands your attention just as much as the visual landscape.
But then you reach Coonoor, and the entire physical character of the journey shifts.
Yeah, the mechanical shift literally mirrors the geographical shift. At Coonoor, the impossibly steep rack-and-pinion section comes to an end.
The hard part is over.
Right. The brutal work of climbing the vertical cliff face is done. Because they no longer need that specialized grip, they swap out the hard-working Swiss steam locomotive for a diesel engine.
Oh, okay.
And as the mechanics quiet down, the landscape softens. The dramatic, terrifying drops and rocky gorges transition into these beautiful, rolling pastoral hills.
It's a complete vibe change. You go from feeling like you're surviving a cliff face to floating through a garden.
Pretty much.
The train slows down to what feels like a walking pace. You're moving through the upper Nilgiris, which the guide describes as an endless green carpet of tea gardens covering every single hillside in every direction.
It's incredibly scenic.
Yeah, you're sitting in these quaint wooden coaches with the large windows pulled up, and this warm, slightly grassy smell of fresh tea just drifts constantly through the carriage. You can look out and see the bright flashes of color from the tea pickers' saris out in the fields.
And as you move through this softer landscape, the train starts hitting these historically named stations that act as perfect little Victorian time capsules.
I love those old stations.
They are small stone buildings kept in remarkably good condition, with the station names painted in crisp white on the platform walls.
Stations like Wellington, right?
Exactly. Named after the Duke of Wellington, who actually served in the region long before his famous military campaigns in Europe.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then you pass through Ketty, which opens up to these spectacular sweeping valley views, and Lovedale, which has been home to the Lawrence School since 1858, educating the children of civil servants and officers for over a century and a half.
And you only stop at each of these stations for a minute or two, just long enough to buy a hot cup of tea from a vendor walking the platform, maybe nod to the station master, and then the whistle blows and you're moving again.
It's intensely nostalgic.
But the guide brings up something that completely reframes this secluded, slow-moving Victorian train. How does something tucked away in the mountains of South India become a massive, instantly recognizable pop culture icon across all of Asia?
Right. That brings us to what the Five Senses Tours Guide calls the Chaya connection.
The Bollywood connection.
Yes. In 1998, the legendary Bollywood director Mani Ratnam decided to film the opening sequence of his movie Dil Se right here, utilizing the Nilgiri Mountain Railway.
Such a famous scene.
It features superstar Shah Rukh Khan and dancer Malaika Arora performing this incredibly high-energy, choreographed dance routine on the actual roof of the moving train as it winds through the Nilgiri Hills.
I mean, I'm trying to picture the sheer logistical madness of this. They're doing a full dance routine with dozens of backup dancers on the roof of a narrow-gauge train from the 1800s.
It's insane.
Right. While it is physically traversing 257 bridges and 209 curves with sheer drops into a river valley.
The safety meetings for that shoot must have been extraordinary.
No kidding.
But they pulled it off. And it became one of the most iconic, unforgettable visual moments in the history of Indian cinema. The tea gardens, the deep gorges, the smoke from the engine, they are all captured perfectly in that sequence.
And it went global, too.
It really did. The visual was so striking, so culturally pervasive, that the Hollywood director Spike Lee actually went out of his way to recreate the sequence for his film Inside Man.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. So millions of people who have never explicitly thought about visiting the Nilgiris already have this exact landscape and this exact train burned into their cinematic memory.
That's wild. Well, we've covered the romanticized history, the breathtaking Swiss engineering, and the sheer Bollywood glamour of dancing on moving trains. But let's bring this all back to you, the listener.
Yeah, why do it today?
Exactly. If you're planning a trip to South India, why do you specifically need to spend 5 hours locked in this train? If you have the means, why not just hire a comfortable car and drive up the mountain on a modern road?
Because driving fundamentally changes how you process geography. If you take a car up the winding road to Uti, the landscape shifts very gradually.
Yeah.
You're enclosed in a metal box, moving relatively fast, and the dense forest often completely obscures your view of the surrounding valleys. You conceptually know you're going up an elevation, but it's just trees rushing by a window.
It's a blur. You don't really feel the ecosystem changing around you.
Exactly.
Huh.
But the train forces you to experience the vertical and ecological geography of the Blue Mountains
Yeah.
in a way that is physically comprehensible. Think of it like riding an elevator through a massive biological high-rise.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Let's look at a typical Five Senses tour's itinerary, like their Blue Mountains tour from Bangalore. Over a few days, you transition through completely different worlds. You start on the ground floor, in the dry, deciduous forest of Bandipur at 800 meters, looking for wild elephants. Then you move up into the transition forests of the lower Nilgiris. Then you hit the mist-covered tea estates of Coonoor at 1,800 meters. And finally, you emerge onto the top floor, the open montane grasslands of the upper Nilgiris above 2,000 meters.
And the train journey seamlessly threads all those distinct environments together in a single, continuous 5-hour window.
Exactly. With the open carriages and the slow, grinding pace, the landscape change isn't just visible, it's framed continuously. You aren't just riding a vehicle from point A to point B.
You're physically reading the landscape like a vertical map.
Right. It makes the extraordinary ecological range of South India immediately viscerally real to you.
So if you want to ride this biological elevator, what does the practical strategy look like? Because a 5-hour ride on a 19th century railway definitely requires some planning.
You can't just show up.
Right. The first major tip from the guide, if you're traveling uphill from Mettupalayam toward Coonoor, you want to do whatever you can to secure seats on the right side of the train.
Yes, that is crucial.
Because the track hugs the cliffs on the left, the right side is where the mountain drops away entirely, giving you those jaw-dropping, unobstructed panoramic views of the valleys.
And you need to come prepared for the physical reality of the journey. You're going to be on this train for hours, and your food and water options are strictly limited to whatever the platform vendors are selling during those brief 1-minute station stops.
So bring your own water.
Bring your own water. Bring a light jacket or a sweater. Even if you were sweating profusely down on the plains at 7 a.m., remember the physics of the climb. You're going to lose 15 degrees of heat as you move up into the clouds.
And perhaps the most critical piece of practical advice, you cannot treat this like a hop-on, hop-off subway. It's a historic train with a very strictly fixed small passenger capacity, and the demand to ride it is absolutely massive.
Yeah, the full route from Mettupalayam to Uti regularly sells out weeks and sometimes months in advance.
What?
This is especially true during the peak season from October to March, or during major school holidays. Tickets are managed through IRCTC, the Indian Railway Catering and Tourism Corporation, which requires setting up an account and navigating a highly competitive booking system.
Which really underscores why the guide highlights the value of guided experiences.
Yeah.
When you book a structured itinerary, like the Blue Mountains tour, the guides take on the entire logistical headache of trying to secure those highly contested tickets.
It saves so much stress.
Yeah, they turn a potentially stressful, complex booking process into a guaranteed seat on a historic marvel. Now, if you are extremely tight on time, you do have the option to just do the shorter, roughly 1-hour ride between Coonoor and Uti.
Which is an option.
Right. That section runs a bit more frequently and covers those beautiful tea gardens we talked about.
It's a lovely ride, but you have to understand the trade-off. If you only do the upper section, you miss out entirely on the sheer engineering drama of the rack-and-pinion climb.
You miss the clunk.
you miss the clunk. It comes down to whether you want a pleasant pastoral ride through the tea estates or if you want to experience the full scale of what Victorian engineers managed to achieve against impossible odds on that cliff face.
Which brings me to a final thought for you to chew on today. We live in an era where we are absolutely obsessed with high-speed travel. We build bullet trains, we take supersonic flights,
Wow.
we pride ourselves on the ability to cross entire continents in a matter of hours, largely completely divorced from the land below us.
We just fly right over it.
Exactly. But maybe, just maybe, the ultimate luxury in travel isn't speed at all. Perhaps true luxury is an enforced, slow, mechanical climb. A journey that physically locks you to the earth, drops the temperature degree by degree, and forces you to feel the massive ancient world rising and changing completely around you.
If you decide to travel to India, we have a recommendation. Five Senses Tours organizes tours across India which are immersive cultural experiences. You can email contact@fivesensestours.com. Note 5 is written as a numeral in contact at fivesensestours.com or WhatsApp to +919 845 677 446.